Grand Junction, Colorado, a quiet town nestled in a valley, surrounded by towering mesas and clear blue skies. It was a place where everyone knew their neighbors, and nothing ever seemed out of place. Among its residents, the Blagg family stood out as the epitome of perfection. Michael Blagg, a respected sales executive, was known for his dedication to work and his church. His wife, Jennifer, was the kind of woman who could light up a room with her warmth and charm. Together, they were raising their 6-year-old daughter, Abby, a bright and bubbly little girl who was adored by everyone who met her. To outsiders, the Blagg household was a haven of happiness. Their home, a modest yet inviting house on a tree-lined street, seemed to radiate the love they shared. Inside, Jennifer meticulously maintained every detail, from the family photos on the mantel to the freshly baked cookies that often greeted Michael when he came home from work. Abby's laughter echoed through the halls, a constant reminder of the innocence and joy that defined their lives. Michael's career as a sales executive demanded long hours, but he wore his success as a badge of honor. He believed his hard work was securing a bright future for Jennifer and Abby. On Sundays, the family attended church together, sitting in the same pew every week. They were the kind of family that neighbors admired, a picture of unity in an increasingly chaotic world. Yet, beneath the surface of this idyllic life, subtle cracks had begun to form. Jennifer, once the vibrant and attentive partner Michael married, seemed more distant lately. Her laughter, though still warm, no longer reached her eyes. She had started spending more time on her own, taking long trips into town that she didn't always explain. When Michael asked, she'd brush it off with a casual, just errands. He trusted her completely. Why wouldn't he? But there was a flicker of unease that he couldn't quite place. Abby, blissfully unaware of any tension, continued to be the glue that held them together. Her boundless energy and endless questions kept Jennifer and Michael engaged, even on the most challenging days. To Michael, she was his everything, the reason he worked so hard, the light that guided him through the darkest moments. Jennifer adored her too, but even her affection for Abby couldn't entirely mask the distance growing between her and Michael. One evening, as Michael sat at the dinner table, he noticed Jennifer texting under the table. It wasn't unusual for her to use her phone, but something about her guarded expression made him pause. She quickly put the phone away when she caught his gaze. "Just a friend asking about tomorrow's PTA meeting," she said with a faint smile. He nodded, choosing not to press further. After all, Jennifer was a devoted mother and wife. She wouldn't keep secrets, would she? The town of Grand Junction had no idea what was brewing behind the Blagg family's pristine facade. To their friends and neighbors, they were the perfect family, untouchable by the struggles that plagued so many others. But even the strongest-looking foundations can hide unseen fractures. Michael, Jennifer, and Abby were about to find out just how deep those cracks ran. Life in the Blagg household carried on with an air of routine perfection. Michael left for work early every morning, returning home late to find Jennifer preparing dinner and Abby eager to show off her latest drawings. But something felt off. The warmth that once defined their interactions seemed to have cooled, replaced by an uneasy distance. Michael brushed it off as the strain of daily life. Everyone had rough patches, didn't they? It wasn't just the distance that gnawed at Michael, though. Jennifer's habits had shifted in subtle ways. She now spent more time in town, often returning later than expected. When Michael asked, she'd smile and say, "I got caught up at the store," or "I ran into a friend." Her answers seemed plausible enough, but there was something in her tone, a hesitancy he couldn't ignore. One evening, Jennifer excused herself from dinner to take a phone call. As she disappeared into the hallway, Michael noticed Abby watching him with curious eyes. "Mommy's been on the phone a lot," she said innocently, her voice tinged with confusion. Michael forced a smile and reassured her, but Abby's words lingered in his mind long after she went to bed. The next morning, Michael left for work as usual, but his thoughts were consumed by the image of Jennifer's guarded expression during her phone call. That evening, he came home to find her scrolling through her phone at the kitchen counter, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. She quickly put it down when she noticed him. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice overly cheerful. Michael hesitated before responding. He wanted to ask who she'd been texting, but decided against it. Instead, he answered her question with a practiced smile. The days that followed only deepened Michael's unease. Jennifer's trips into town grew more frequent, her explanations less convincing. She began dressing up more than usual, wearing outfits that Michael hadn't seen her in before. One Saturday, as she left the house claiming she needed to run errands, Michael couldn't resist checking their shared credit card account. He found charges at restaurants they'd never visited together and stores he'd never heard her mention. The discoveries unsettled him, but he wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. Instead, he began observing her more closely, piecing together the changes he'd been ignoring. She'd started locking her phone, something she'd never done before. She avoided eye contact during conversations and seemed more preoccupied, as though her mind were elsewhere. Then came the remark from a neighbor. Michael was outside one afternoon when a friendly voice called out, "Hey, Michael, I saw Jennifer the other day. She was at the diner downtown with someone. Looked like they were having a good time." The comment was casual, harmless even, but it struck Michael like a bolt of lightning. He smiled politely, nodding as though the information meant nothing, but inside his mind raced. Who was she with? Why hadn't she mentioned it? That night, as Michael lay awake in bed, Jennifer asleep beside him, his thoughts spiraled. The woman he'd trusted implicitly, the mother of his child, was hiding something. But what? And why? He stared at the ceiling, his heart pounding as he resolved to uncover the truth, no matter where it led him. The unease that had been growing in Michael's mind became unbearable. He could no longer ignore the small inconsistencies, the hidden phone calls, and the way Jennifer had begun avoiding his gaze. Every detail gnawed at him, forming a picture he didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. He had to know the truth. One quiet evening, while Jennifer was tucking Abby into bed, Michael sat alone in the living room. His eyes wandered to her laptop, sitting innocently on the kitchen counter. He hesitated. This wasn't something he would have done before. But the doubt, the unbearable weight of suspicion, was too much. He stood, walked to the counter, and opened the laptop. His fingers hovered over the keys as he took a deep breath and clicked on her email. What he found made his heart stop. The inbox seemed unremarkable at first glance. Messages from school, promotional emails, reminders. But then he noticed a folder tucked away at the side labeled Personal. Curiosity, mixed with a growing dread, compelled him to open it. His stomach churned as he scanned the subject lines. "Can't wait to see you. Last night was amazing. Miss you already." The messages were from someone named Doug. Clicking on one, Michael felt his breath catch in his throat. The words were explicit, filled with affection, longing, and a familiarity that cut him to his core. Jennifer had written back with equal passion, expressing her desire to escape the mundane routines of her life. She mentioned Michael, briefly, dismissively, describing him as distant, preoccupied, and oblivious. Michael read every word, his hands gripping the edge of the counter so tightly his knuckles turned white. The betrayal was undeniable. Jennifer, the woman he had loved and trusted, had not only been unfaithful, but had also reduced their marriage to a burdensome obligation in her correspondence. He closed the laptop quickly when he heard her footsteps approaching. Jennifer entered the room, smiling softly as if nothing had changed. She kissed his cheek and asked, "Are you okay? You look pale." Michael forced a smile, nodding, though he felt as if his world had collapsed. In the days that followed, Michael became consumed by what he had read. He replayed their conversations, noticing every time Jennifer seemed distracted or gave vague excuses. Her sudden need to run errands now carried a sinister undertone. He began monitoring her more closely, her movements, her phone calls, even the way she lingered near the window while texting. Then came the confirmation he didn't want but couldn't avoid. One evening, after Jennifer had gone to bed, Michael retrieved her phone. The password was new, a clear attempt to keep him out, but it wasn't difficult to guess. He scrolled through her messages and there they were, texts from Doug, filled with the same ardor as the emails. "I can't wait to see you again," one message read. "Tomorrow night, same place?" Jennifer's reply was quick. I'll be there, always." Michael's blood boiled. His mind raced with questions. Who was Doug? How long had this been going on? What else had she been hiding? But beyond the anger was a deeper wound, one that struck at his very sense of self. Had he been such a terrible husband that Jennifer felt justified in turning to someone else? He didn't confront her immediately. Instead, he began piecing together what he could about Doug. The name didn't ring a bell, but a quick search of Jennifer's contacts revealed he worked with her briefly at her old job. The realization stung. This wasn't some passing infatuation. It was someone she had a history with, someone she trusted enough to risk everything for. The final blow came when a neighbor, during an innocent conversation, casually mentioned seeing Jennifer at a cafe downtown. She was with some guy. They looked pretty cozy, the neighbor said with a chuckle. Michael nodded, forcing a polite laugh, but inside, the betrayal deepened. That night, Michael lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Jennifer slept peacefully beside him, oblivious to the storm raging in his mind. His thoughts churned. Anger, humiliation, heartbreak. He had the evidence. He had the truth. But what would he do with it? Michael sat in the dimly lit living room, the house eerily quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. The evidence he had gathered, emails, text messages, and the damning account from the neighbor, burned a hole in his mind. Jennifer had betrayed him, and while he had tried to suppress his anger, it was bubbling over, impossible to contain. It was late when Jennifer returned home, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. She placed her purse on the counter and offered him a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sorry, I'm late," she said casually. "I ran into an old friend." Michael stood abruptly, his heart pounding. "Who is Doug?" he asked, his voice sharp and unwavering. Jennifer froze, her smile fading instantly. "What are you talking about?" she replied, feigning confusion. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," he snapped, holding up a printed email. The words on the page, so incriminating, seemed to hang in the air between them. Jennifer's face went pale as she realized the depth of his discovery. "Michael, I can explain," she began, but he cut her off. "Explain what? That you've been lying to me? That you've been sneaking around with another man while I was working to provide for this family?" His voice grew louder with each word, his fury uncontrollable. Jennifer's composure faltered. "It's not what you think," she said, her tone pleading. "Doug and it's complicated." "Complicated?" Michael shouted. "You've humiliated me, Jennifer. You've destroyed everything we built together." Jennifer's voice hardened as she fought back tears. "Destroyed? Michael, do you even hear yourself? You've been so consumed with work that you didn't even notice me anymore. I was lonely. I needed someone to talk to, someone who cared." "Don't you dare blame me for this," he said, his voice low and trembling with rage. "You had a choice, Jennifer, and you chose to betray me." Their argument escalated, the tension in the room thick enough to suffocate. Jennifer tried to regain control, raising her hands as if to calm him. "We need to talk about this rationally," she said, her voice cracking. "For Abby's sake." Michael shook his head, his anger unrelenting. "For Abby's sake? Don't bring her into this. She deserves better than a mother who lies and cheats." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears, but there was a flicker of defiance in her gaze. "Maybe Abby deserves better than a father who's never here," she retorted. The words cut Michael deeply, and he staggered back as though he'd been struck. For a moment, there was silence, each of them catching their breath, their words still hanging in the air. Then Jennifer spoke again, her voice softer but resolute. "I can't do this anymore, Michael. This marriage, it's broken. I think we both know that." The finality of her words sent a chill down Michael's spine. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jennifer took a deep breath. "I want a divorce," she said, her tone steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I'll take Abby and figure things out. This isn't working." Michael felt his world crumble. The anger that had driven him moments ago was now replaced by an overwhelming sense of loss. He stared at Jennifer, the woman he had loved, now standing before him as a stranger. "You don't mean that," he said, shaking his head. "You can't." Jennifer didn't respond. Instead, she turned and walked toward the bedroom, leaving Michael standing alone in the silence. His fists clenched at his sides, his mind racing with emotions he couldn't control. He felt betrayed, humiliated, and powerless. Above all, he felt an unrelenting rage that threatened to consume him. As the house fell into an uneasy stillness, Michael sat back down, his thoughts dark and chaotic. Jennifer's betrayal had shattered the life he thought they shared. But what would happen next, he couldn't yet comprehend. The air in the house felt heavy, oppressive. Jennifer's words, her calm declaration that she wanted a divorce, echoed endlessly in Michael's mind. She had walked away as if she had the power to dismantle their life together with a single sentence. Michael sat alone in the living room, the weight of betrayal crushing him. The hours ticked by. Michael didn't sleep. His thoughts raced, swinging wildly between anger, sadness, and despair. How could she? How could the woman he had built a life with, the mother of his child, choose to destroy everything? He replayed the confrontation over and over, each word cutting deeper than the last. By the time the sun rose, Michael had made a decision. He would confront her again, this time without holding back. Jennifer was in the kitchen making breakfast for Abby, who sat at the table, humming a song as she colored. The sight of his daughter's innocence, her obliviousness to the storm brewing around her, sent a pang of guilt through Michael. But that guilt was quickly consumed by rage as he watched Jennifer move about the kitchen, acting as though nothing had changed. "Jennifer," he said, his voice cold. She froze for a moment before turning to face him. "Michael, not now," she whispered, glancing at Abby. "No," he said firmly, his tone rising. "We're going to talk about this. Now." Jennifer's expression hardened. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Not in front of her." But Michael wouldn't relent. She deserves to know what's happening to this family. She deserves to know what kind of person her mother really is. Abby looked up, her wide eyes darting between her parents. "Daddy?" she asked, her small voice trembling. Jennifer's face contorted with frustration. "Michael, stop. This isn't fair to her." Michael stepped closer, his fists clenched. "Fair? You're talking about fair? You cheated, Jennifer. You lied to me, to her, to everyone, and now you're just going to walk away like none of it matters?" Jennifer's voice shook as she replied, "I don't want to fight with you, Michael. I'm doing what's best for Abby and for myself." "For yourself," Michael spat. "It's always about you, isn't it? Your needs, your happiness. What about me, Jennifer? What about this family?" Abby began to cry, her small sobs filling the tense silence. Jennifer rushed to her side, pulling her into a hug. "It's okay, sweetheart. Mommy's here," she murmured, shooting Michael a glare. Something inside Michael snapped. He slammed his fist against the wall, the sound reverberating through the room. Jennifer flinched, clutching Abby tighter. "You don't get to play the victim here," he shouted. "You don't get to destroy everything and act like you're the one who's hurt." Jennifer's voice was steady, though her hands trembled as she stroked Abby's hair. "I'm not going to let you do this, Michael. Abby and I are leaving. Today." Her words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Michael stared at her, his vision blurring with rage and desperation. "You think you can just leave?" he growled. "Take her away from me?" Jennifer met his gaze, her eyes full of defiance. "Yes," she said simply. Michael's breath came in ragged gasps. He turned and stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind him. Upstairs, he paced the bedroom, his mind racing. She couldn't take Abby. She couldn't leave. This was his family, his life, and she was trying to rip it away from him. As the day wore on, the house grew eerily quiet. Jennifer packed a bag for Abby, keeping her close as she avoided Michael. But tension crackled in the air, a storm waiting to break. Michael sat in the darkened bedroom, his thoughts spiraling further and further into darkness. The house was silent, too silent. The echoes of their earlier argument seemed to linger in the air, heavy and suffocating. Michael sat motionless in the dimly lit bedroom, his mind racing. Hours had passed since Jennifer's defiant declaration that she was leaving with Abby. Now, as the night stretched on, the house had plunged into an unsettling calm. But calm wasn't what Michael felt. His hands trembled as he stared at the floor, his thoughts spiraling into darkness. She couldn't leave. She wouldn't. His family was everything to him. How could Jennifer think she could just walk away and take Abby? No, that wasn't going to happen. Downstairs, Jennifer was quietly gathering a few more things for Abby. The suitcase sat on the floor by the door, half-zipped and waiting. Abby clung to her mother's leg, clutching a stuffed animal. "Mommy, are we leaving now?" she asked softly. Jennifer knelt and cupped her daughter's face, forcing a smile. "Soon, sweetheart. Just a little longer," she whispered. Her voice was steady, but her eyes flickered toward the staircase, dreading Michael's next move. And then it happened. Michael stormed down the stairs, his face a storm of rage and despair. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice cold and sharp. Jennifer straightened, instinctively pulling Abby closer. "Michael, stop," she said firmly. "I'm leaving, and you're not going to stop me." But Michael didn't stop. He stepped closer, his voice rising. "You think you can just pack a bag and walk out? Take my daughter, after everything you've done?" Abby whimpered, and Jennifer knelt to shield her. "Michael, don't do this," she pleaded. "Think about Abby. This isn't good for her." "You don't get to talk about what's good for her," Michael spat. "You don't get to decide what happens to this family." The argument spiraled, each word more heated than the last. Then, in a single moment of blind fury, Michael grabbed a heavy object from the nearby counter, a wrench, and swung it. Jennifer's gasp was cut short as she crumpled to the floor, blood pooling around her head. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael stared at the scene before him, his chest heaving, his mind blank. Abby's cries pierced the air, her tiny voice shaking with terror. "Mommy! Mommy, wake up!" she screamed, tugging at Jennifer's lifeless body. Michael dropped the wrench with a metallic clang, his hands trembling. Reality crashed down on him like a tidal wave. What had he done? Abby's sobs broke through his haze. He moved toward her, his voice shaking. "Abby, it's okay," he said, though his words rang hollow. "It's going to be okay." But Abby pulled away, her wide eyes filled with fear. "No, Daddy!" she cried, clutching her stuffed animal. Michael froze, his heart breaking as he realized the depth of what he had done, not just to Jennifer, but to Abby as well. The hours that followed were a blur. Michael worked methodically, his movements robotic and detached. He wrapped Jennifer's body in a tarp, struggling to avoid looking at her face. He carried her to his car, his breathing labored, and drove to his workplace under the cover of darkness. At the industrial dumpster behind the building, he hesitated. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't supposed to be his life. But there was no turning back now. He lifted the tarp and let it fall into the dumpster, the sound echoing in the empty lot. When he returned home, the house was eerily quiet again. Abby was asleep in her room, or at least pretending to be. Michael sat at the kitchen table, staring at his blood-stained hands. He knew what he had to do next. Clean the scene, erase the evidence, and tell the world a story they would believe. Tomorrow he would call the police and report his wife and daughter missing. The following morning, Michael's call to 911 was calm, but laced with urgency. "My wife and daughter are missing," he told the dispatcher, his voice steady yet tinged with what sounded like genuine concern. "They were here last night, and now, I don't know where they are." When officers arrived at the Blagg home, Michael greeted them at the door, his demeanor somber. He explained that he had woken up to an empty house and assumed Jennifer had taken Abby out early. "But her car is still in the driveway," he added, his brow furrowed. "And she didn't take her phone or wallet." Inside, the house appeared ordinary. No signs of a struggle, no broken windows or doors. But something about it felt too pristine. The officers took note of the freshly cleaned bedroom, the faint smell of bleach lingering in the air. "It's just habit," Michael explained when asked about it. "Jennifer's always been particular about keeping the house spotless." Word of Jennifer and Abby's disappearance spread quickly through the close-knit community of Grand Junction. Neighbors who knew the Blaggs as the picture-perfect family were stunned. Jennifer was beloved for her warm personality, and Abby's joyful presence was a fixture at local gatherings. To think they could simply vanish was unthinkable. Candlelight vigils were organized within days, the community rallying around Michael in his time of apparent despair. Standing before a crowd of concerned friends and strangers, Michael spoke with a trembling voice. "Jennifer and Abby are my whole world," he said, holding back tears. "Please, if anyone knows anything, come forward. I just want them home." His plea was met with sympathetic murmurs and promises of support. Volunteers joined search parties, combing nearby parks, hiking trails, and neighborhoods. Flyers with Jennifer and Abby's smiling faces were plastered on every lamppost and bulletin board in town. To everyone who knew him, Michael seemed like a devastated husband and father, desperately clinging to hope. But behind closed doors, investigators were beginning to see a different picture. Detectives assigned to the case found inconsistencies in Michael's account of the morning Jennifer and Abby disappeared. His description of events was precise, too precise. When asked what time he woke up or whether he had heard anything unusual during the night, Michael provided answers that felt rehearsed. One neighbor came forward with a chilling recollection. "I heard yelling that night," they said, hesitating as they recalled the details. "It sounded like a man and a woman arguing. Then there was silence." The revelation prompted detectives to dig deeper, questioning whether the Blagg home was as peaceful as it seemed. The first major breakthrough came during a routine walkthrough of the house. Using luminol, investigators detected faint traces of blood in the master bedroom, despite the spotless appearance. "It had been cleaned up," one officer noted, "but not perfectly." The findings raised immediate suspicions. Where was Jennifer, and why hadn't Michael mentioned anything about blood? Meanwhile, Michael's behavior began to shift. While initially cooperative, he became defensive when pressed for more details. When asked about Jennifer's emotional state leading up to her disappearance, he hesitated before responding. "She was stressed, but who wouldn't be with a 6-year-old and a household to manage?" As the days turned into weeks, whispers began to circulate in Grand Junction. People who had once offered Michael unwavering support started to wonder if there was more to the story. "He just doesn't seem right," one neighbor commented. "I mean, he says all the right things, but something about him feels off." Despite the mounting questions, the search for Jennifer and Abby continued. Volunteers pushed deeper into the surrounding wilderness, their voices calling out names that echoed unanswered. But with each passing day, hope dwindled, replaced by an unspoken dread. In the quiet corners of Grand Junction, a question lingered on everyone's mind. What really happened to Jennifer and Abby Blagg? As weeks stretched into months, the search for Jennifer and Abby Blagg continued, but hope had dimmed in the hearts of many in Grand Junction. The community that had once rallied around Michael now whispered suspicions behind closed doors. The cheerful facade he wore at vigils and public appeals was cracking, revealing something darker beneath. Detectives, driven by the inconsistencies in Michael's story and the faint traces of blood found in the Blagg home, began to focus their investigation more sharply. The luminol results from the bedroom had revealed not just blood, but the outline of a struggle, evidence that someone had tried desperately to erase. This wasn't a simple disappearance. Something violent had happened within those walls. The turning point came when investigators decided to expand their search beyond the house. Suspicions about Michael's involvement grew after his coworkers mentioned something unusual. "He seemed distracted the day after they went missing," one colleague recalled. "He was late to work, and he looked shaken." That led the detectives to Michael's workplace, an industrial site with heavy machinery and dumpsters. The dumpsters were routinely emptied into a local landfill, an area so vast and chaotic that searching it seemed impossible. But the police had no other leads. With grim determination, they assembled a team to sift through the mountains of garbage. It was a painstaking process, requiring precision and patience. After days of combing through the landfill, one officer called out, "Over here!" The team rushed over, and what they found sent chills through even the most seasoned detectives. Wrapped in a tarp and buried beneath layers of trash was a human body. Forensics would later confirm it was Jennifer Blagg. The discovery rocked the town of Grand Junction. News spread like wildfire. Jennifer's body had been found, but there was no trace of Abby. What could have happened to the 6-year-old girl? The question haunted not just investigators, but the entire community. Forensics provided more damning evidence. The tarp used to wrap Jennifer's body was traced back to Michael's home, matching a set he had stored in the garage. Additionally, Microscopic fibers on the tarp matched the carpet in the Blagg master bedroom. Combined with the blood evidence already discovered, the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and all signs pointed to Michael. When confronted with this new evidence, Michael's initial composure began to falter. "I don't know how that happened," he stammered during an interrogation. I couldn't." But his protests rang hollow. The detectives pressed harder, pointing out that his timeline didn't add up, that Jennifer's injuries were consistent with a violent struggle in the bedroom. One of the lead investigators, speaking at a press conference, delivered a chilling update. "The discovery of Jennifer Blagg's body confirms this is now a homicide investigation," he said solemnly. "We are committed to finding Abby and uncovering the full truth of what happened that night." Back in Grand Junction, the atmosphere shifted from concern to outrage. Friends and neighbors who had once supported Michael now turned against him. "It's hard to believe," said one neighbor, "but when you put all the pieces together, it's obvious. He's hiding something." The mounting pressure led detectives to re-examine every detail of the case. They interviewed more neighbors, reviewed Michael's financial records, and searched for any trace of Abby. Each lead seemed to bring them closer to an inevitable conclusion, yet the biggest question remained unanswered. Where was Abby? Michael, meanwhile, grew increasingly isolated. The man who had once stood confidently in front of cameras, pleading for his family's return, now avoided the public eye. His once sympathetic demeanor was replaced with hostility and defensiveness. As the investigation closed in, a chilling theory began to take shape among the detectives. Michael hadn't just killed Jennifer. He had likely harmed Abby as well, either in a fit of rage or to silence a witness. But without her body, the theory remained unproven, a shadow hanging over an already horrifying case. The evidence against Michael Blagg had reached a tipping point. Forensic analysis, testimony from co-workers, and inconsistencies in his own account painted a damning picture. The discovery of Jennifer's body and the blood evidence in their home were enough to issue an arrest warrant. For detectives, the time had come to confront the man who had once been seen as a grieving husband and father. It was a cold morning when officers arrived at the Blagg residence. Michael opened the door, his face pale and drawn. He had been expecting them. Perhaps he had seen the mounting reports in the media, or perhaps his own guilt had made him paranoid. Either way, he didn't resist when they stepped inside. "Michael Blagg," one of the officers said, his voice firm but calm. "You are under arrest for the murder of Jennifer Blagg." Michael's expression barely changed. He nodded slightly, his hands trembling as they were cuffed behind his back. "I didn't do it," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "I didn't kill her." The scene was surreal. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, their expressions a mix of shock and curiosity. The man who had stood before them at vigils pleading for help was now being led away in handcuffs. It was almost impossible to reconcile the two images. At the station, the interrogation room was sterile and cold, a harsh fluorescent light illuminating Michael's face. Detectives laid out the evidence before him, the bloodstains in the bedroom, the fibers on the tarp, and the inconsistencies in his timeline. Each piece was a nail in the coffin. Michael sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the table. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What wasn't supposed to happen, Michael?" the lead detective pressed. He looked up, his expression hollow. "She was going to leave. Take Abby. I just wanted to stop her." The room fell silent as his words hung in the air. While Michael hadn't explicitly confessed, his statement was damning. Detectives leaned in, hoping to coax more from him, but he clammed up, retreating into silence. The air in the room grew heavier with each passing second. Outside, news of Michael's arrest spread rapidly. The media swarmed the station, eager for updates. Friends and family of Jennifer, many of whom had suspected Michael from the start, expressed mixed emotions. Relief that an arrest had been made, anguish that it had come to this, and an aching void where Abby's fate remained unknown. In Grand Junction, the community was divided. Some still clung to the image of Michael as a loving father, unable to fathom that he could harm his family. Others saw the evidence as irrefutable. "If he didn't do it," one neighbor said, Then who else could it have been? It's always been him. Michael's defense attorneys quickly began crafting their narrative, painting him as a devoted husband and father who had been wrongfully accused. "There's no proof he killed Jennifer," one lawyer told reporters. "The evidence is circumstantial at best." But the prosecution was undeterred. With Michael in custody, they were determined to build an airtight case. They knew the battle ahead would be long and grueling, but they also knew they had one undeniable advantage: the truth. As Michael sat alone in his cell that night, the weight of what lay ahead pressed down on him. The image of Jennifer haunted him, her face a constant reminder of what he had done. And then there was Abby. The unanswered question of her whereabouts loomed larger than anything else, a shadow that threatened to consume everyone involved in the case. The stage was set for the trial of the century, and for the first time, the facade that Michael had carefully constructed was beginning to crumble. The courtroom was packed. Every seat was filled, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Journalists, community members, and even distant relatives of Jennifer Blagg had gathered to witness the trial that had gripped Grand Junction and the nation. Michael Blagg sat at the defense table, his face pale but emotionless. His defense team huddled close, whispering strategies as the prosecution prepared to lay out their case. The prosecution wasted no time. Their opening statement was sharp and calculated. "This case is about betrayal," the lead prosecutor began. "It's about a man who felt his world crumbling and made a choice, one that destroyed a family." The prosecutor then turned to the jury. "We will prove that Michael Blagg killed his wife Jennifer in cold blood, and we will show you the overwhelming evidence that ties him to this heinous crime." As the trial unfolded, the prosecution methodically presented their case. First, the forensic evidence. Luminol tests revealing bloodstains in the master bedroom, microscopic fibers on the tarp matching the Blagg home, and the chilling discovery of Jennifer's body in the landfill. Each exhibit brought a ripple of discomfort through the courtroom, but Michael remained stoic, his hands clasped tightly on the table. The jury listened intently as the prosecution called their key witnesses. A forensic expert detailed how Jennifer's injuries were consistent with blunt force trauma. "This was no accident," the expert stated firmly. "These injuries indicate a violent struggle." A neighbor testified to hearing loud arguing on the night Jennifer disappeared. "It sounded bad," the neighbor recalled, "and then it just stopped." Perhaps the most damning testimony came from Michael's co-workers. One described how Michael had inquired about landfill schedules shortly before Jennifer's disappearance. "At the time it seemed odd," the co-worker admitted, "but now it's chilling." The defense countered with their own narrative. "Michael Blagg is an innocent man," his attorney declared in their opening statement. The prosecution's case is built on circumstantial evidence and assumptions. They argued that the luminol results were inconclusive and suggested that the blood in the bedroom could have been from an unrelated incident. They pointed to the lack of a murder weapon and questioned the reliability of the neighbor's testimony. But the defense faced an uphill battle. The prosecution introduced a final, haunting piece of evidence, an unsent email draft from Jennifer to her lover Doug. In it, she wrote about her intention to leave Michael and start a new life. "He doesn't know yet," the email read, "but I can't stay in this marriage anymore." The revelation caused a stir in the courtroom. The prosecution argued that this email was Michael's motive, a reason for him to lash out when confronted with the reality of losing his wife and daughter. The defense tried to downplay its significance, claiming that Michael had no knowledge of the email at the time of Jennifer's death. As the trial neared its conclusion, both sides delivered impassioned closing arguments. The prosecution painted Michael as a controlling husband who snapped under the pressure of betrayal. Jennifer was planning her future, the prosecutor told the jury, but Michael Blagg took that future from her, and possibly from Abby, too. The defense implored the jury to consider the lack of direct evidence linking Michael to Jennifer's death. "There is doubt," his attorney argued, "and in our justice system, doubt means acquittal." After weeks of testimony and hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. The room fell silent as the foreperson rose to speak. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Michael Blagg, guilty of first-degree murder." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Jennifer's family embraced one another, tears streaming down their faces. Michael sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the floor. The judge's voice cut through the noise, delivering the sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. Justice has been served, one family member declared. But even as the gavel fell, one question remained unanswered. What happened to Abby? The courtroom was filled with tension, the kind that grips a room when everyone knows a moment of truth is near. Michael Blagg sat motionless at the defense table, his hands clasped tightly together, his face pale and unreadable. The jury had deliberated for hours, and now their decision was about to be revealed. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and the room fell silent. The judge entered, his expression stoic as he took his seat. The jurors filed in one by one, avoiding eye contact with Michael. This small gesture sent a wave of unease through the room. Jennifer's family sat in the front row, their faces etched with a mixture of hope and dread. The foreperson stood, holding the folded verdict in her hands. Her voice was steady, but the weight of the moment hung heavy. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Michael Blagg, guilty of first-degree murder." Gasps rippled through the gallery, followed by a hushed murmuring. Jennifer's mother broke down in tears, clutching the hand of her husband, who stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. Michael remained still, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. There was no outburst, no protest, just a quiet acceptance, as though he had been expecting this all along. The judge cleared his throat, silencing the whispers. "Michael Blagg, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers. This court hereby sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." The gavel struck, a sharp sound that seemed to echo endlessly. For Jennifer's family, it was a moment of justice, but not closure. Abby's absence loomed large, an unspoken wound that no verdict could heal. As reporters rushed out of the courtroom to break the news, the family remained seated, holding each other in the unbearable quiet. Outside, the courthouse steps became a chaotic scene. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust forward, and voices shouted over one another. Jennifer's sister stepped forward, her voice trembling as she addressed the crowd. "Today, justice was served for Jennifer. But our family will never stop searching for Abby. She is still out there somewhere, and we won't rest until we bring her home." Michael was led away in handcuffs, flanked by deputies. The stoic mask he had worn throughout the trial began to crack as he walked past the rows of cameras and onlookers. His lips moved slightly, as though he wanted to speak, but no words came out. The world watched as he disappeared into the waiting car, the door slamming shut behind him. The aftermath of the verdict rippled through Grand Junction. For some, it was a relief, proof that justice could prevail, even in the darkest of circumstances. For others, it was a stark reminder of the fragility of life and trust. Neighbors who had once admired the Blagg family now struggled to reconcile the image of Michael as a devoted husband and father with the man convicted of such a horrific crime. The unanswered question of Abby's fate continued to haunt the community. Search efforts intensified in the weeks following the trial, with volunteers scouring the surrounding areas for any sign of the little girl. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, hope began to fade. The case grew colder, the leads more tenuous, until it seemed that Abby had vanished entirely. In his prison cell, Michael maintained his silence. Despite repeated appeals from Jennifer's family and law enforcement, he refused to say a word about what had happened to Abby. His silence was not one of defiance, but of despair, a final act of control in a life that had spiraled beyond his grasp. For the town of Grand Junction, the trial may have brought an end to Michael's story, but the lingering mystery of Abby's disappearance remained a scar that would never fully heal. As the years passed, the shadow of Abby Blagg's disappearance hung heavily over Grand Junction. Though Michael's conviction brought some measure of justice for Jennifer, it did nothing to resolve the unanswered question that plagued both investigators and the community. What had happened to 6-year-old Abby? Jennifer's family never stopped searching. Every milestone, Abby's birthdays, the start of a new school year, holidays, served as painful reminders of the little girl's absence. They organized vigils, distributed flyers, and worked with nonprofits dedicated to finding missing children. "We can't give up on her," Jennifer's sister often said during interviews. "We owe her that much." Law enforcement also refused to close the case. While Michael's silence was frustrating, detectives continued to revisit the evidence, hoping to uncover something they had missed. One detective, speaking anonymously, admitted, "It's the one case that keeps me up at night. We have theories, but no proof, no body. It's like she vanished." Michael's refusal to cooperate only deepened the mystery. Despite numerous interrogations and pleas from Jennifer's family, he never wavered. "I don't know what happened to her," was his standard reply. But his flat tone and averted gaze told a different story, a man hiding a secret he would never share. Speculation abounded. Some believed Michael had killed Abby to cover his tracks, ensuring she couldn't testify against him. Others wondered if Abby had witnessed her mother's murder and fled in terror, only to meet a tragic fate elsewhere. There were even those who clung to the hope that Abby might still be alive, hidden away or taken by someone who believed they were rescuing her from a broken home. Every so often, new tips would reignite the investigation. A reported sighting of a girl matching Abby's description in another state. A child's shoe found in the woods near the Blagg home. But each lead ended in disappointment, leaving her fate as elusive as ever. Jennifer's family struggled to balance their grief with their determination to keep Abby's case alive. Publicly, they remained hopeful. Privately, they grappled with the growing possibility that Abby might never come home. "It's the not knowing," Jennifer's mother confided to a reporter once. "You wake up every day wondering if today will be the day you find out, or if you'll have to wait another year." Meanwhile, Grand Junction moved on, though the Blagg case became part of its lore. It was the story parents told their children when warning them about the dangers of the world. The house where the family had lived was eventually sold, but neighbors still spoke in hushed tones about the tragedy that had unfolded there. For the community, the unanswered questions surrounding Abby became a source of collective unease, a reminder of how fragile life could be. In prison, Michael remained a figure of both infamy and mystery. His fellow inmates avoided him, sensing the darkness he carried. On rare occasions, journalists reached out, hoping for an interview that might finally reveal the truth. But Michael declined every request, retreating further into himself as the years wore on. Jennifer's family, though devastated, refused to let her or Abby be forgotten. They created a scholarship fund in Jennifer's name and worked tirelessly to raise awareness about missing children. At each event, a framed photo of Abby, smiling, innocent, forever 6 years old, sat at the center of the table, a stark reminder of their mission. The world outside the Blagg case continued to turn, but for those closest to it, time seemed to stand still. The mystery of Abby remained an open wound, a story without an ending. And as the years stretched into decades, the question lingered. Was Abby still out there, somewhere waiting to be found? Or had she become another silent victim of a tragedy that would never truly be understood? What do you think of Michael Blagg and his actions? Do you believe justice was truly served? From which region are you watching this video? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more compelling true crime stories.